much for inviting me. I am a big fan of the Carpentries, even though I didn't have that much time so far to actually engage more than joining some of these awesome community calls and discussions. So I'm hoping that this is really the beginning of a longer kind of collaboration and engagement. So I really admire everything you all are doing. So just want to start there and thanking everyone for inviting me. And so, yeah, I can share, I would like to share my screen if that's possible. Before I do that, I want to mention that I'm not doing this alone, and I'll be saying this more when I present. PREreview started a little bit earlier than my Mozilla Fellowship with in collaboration with Samantha Hindle, and we're still working together with Sam and Monica Granados. So it's definitely a collaborative endeavor, and we have had so much community input and support. Ibrahim is here to testify for that. So just want to mention this is not my only my project. All right, so if it's okay with you, I'm gonna go on and share my screen. It should work, because I've done this before, but we never know with technology. Ooh, actually, I know that I should go in presentation mode before I share. That I learned. Okay, let's try that. Thank you for your patience. All right, can you all see? And this presentation is linked in the Etherpad. I'm actually minimizing the video, so I don't see your faces. If you can't see the screen, please say I can't, or maybe say yes, and I'll start.
You're good. And I'll keep an eye if there's any questions or comments. And
okay, yeah, I also put a list of questions in there that I'm interested in exploring, and I'm just what I would like this to do. I'm kind of keep this short, and then really dive in something that you are interested in, and perhaps bringing up some of the questions that we're exploring right now. Okay, so as I mentioned before, as I mentioned in my introduction, I was pursuing a PhD. I just finished in this spring in neuroscience, and during it was somehow around my third year, I started engaging with the OHSU library in this open science and learning for the first time what that even meant. And I was very lucky to participate to a conference called OpenCon, which some of you might know, and it was a complete game changer. And so for the first time I really learned something that I felt inside, but I was unconscious about, I think. And it is that science is really not that open and communal endeavor that I dreamed about when I joined, when I decided to become a researcher. But a lot of it, especially if you kind of look beyond the day-by-day work that you might be in a good lab environment, or you might not be, but if you look at the broader scale, science and in general, like just knowledge, not just science, but scholarship is really kept behind locked doors, and it's often driven by opaque processes that engage very few individuals. And so for the first time, I was exposed to a huge number of early career researchers who were really being activists and trying to change this landscape. I was very inspired by that. And one of the things that the process has also made me and others kind of think more about this is about the problems with scholarship is peer review. And as you might know, peer review is in itself, it's a good thing. It's a process by which other researchers check the science or I keep saying science, and I apologize. I don't want to I am a scientist, so but it's scholarship in general. So the production of knowledge of others on behalf of a journal, usually. And the way how these reviewers are selected, they are usually also other researchers themselves. And they are in the field, and they're asked to often anonymously, I'm going to generalize this for the purpose of this talk, but often anonymously in an unrewarded process have to evaluate the science of others. And they're also asked to make sure that work is appropriate for the journal. And so I and others find many problems with this process. And number one is that it's often very opaque. Because the way how these reviewers are selected is often through list of researchers that are known to the editors that are kept private. And then the names of the reviewers themselves are, for the most part, never revealed. And so with this opaqueness and lack of transparency, there are many problems that come. And one of my least favorite is the really broad lack of diversity that exists among the peer reviewers pool. And so what ends up happening is that this process that is so central to the dissemination of knowledge is basically keeps reinforcing the same structures of inequalities that we have been witnessing in academia for centuries. And then last but not least is that even though peer review is so essential to the life of a researcher, there is very, very little training. And so I think this is relevant to the community of the Carpentries. Like many of you know that there is I've gone to my master's in Europe and PhD here, and I've talked to many researchers. There's a little formal training in peer review. If you're lucky, you have a good supervisor who actually gives you, asks you to engage with peer review and gives you feedback on that, gives you feedback on what you write, but there is no formal training that is widespread. And so we said we have this opaque, slow, I forgot to say how slow the process is. It can take up to 6 months to up a year from submission to a journal to actual publication. So you can imagine how that process is also slowing down the dissemination of knowledge. It lacks diversity in training.
I heard surprise.
Hi.
Fair enough.
Okay, I think that was a hiccup. So one other thing, and I'm going to go back to that peer review issues. Another thing that I learned at OpenCon is what preprints are. And this, as also many of you know, are manuscripts that can be made freely available by authors on an online server. And preprints are being taken up in different disciplines in the past 5 years, but they were really a concept that was born about 25 years ago in the physics and computer science kind of realm. And what's awesome about preprints is they're permanent, because for the librarians of you in the group, you know better than I do that when you have a digital object identifier next to any document, you can actually track that document and cite it. And the other awesome part is that they can be versioned. So you can update a version and they get version 1, version 2, version 3 for most of the preprint servers out there. There are many preprint servers. I'm not going to go into much details about preprints. But I just want to bring up my favorite advantage or my favorite plus of posting preprints, which is the fact that anyone can, ideally, anyone can review them. There is no barrier to that because they're openly available. And so I and others had this idea of like starting to recruit more people and more researchers to review. And so this kind of concept of crowdsourcing peer review. And in my mind, more eyes to anything are always better than fewer eyes. And there are always a lot of counter arguments to this that mostly are brought up by the establishment in terms of like, what is an expert? And we can definitely talk more about those issues. But in general, I really believe that the more comments, the better, and it can really speed up, bring to a better result in the end. And so, however, I was very surprised, and when Sam and I looked at this back in 2017, that actually now Sam works for bioarchive, by the way, and at that time she didn't. But we were looking at this data and we're like, wow, there's very little commenting. So actually, it's not a common practice to provide feedback. And we're not even looking for like full reports that would like be similar to a journal-driven one, but like even any comment to a preprint for those servers that offer the service, like bioarchive. So this is just a 10%, 11% on bioarchive. Some other servers don't even have a comment box. And so back in 2017, Sam and I decided to start gathering resources, and it's really like, it was a side project that we were doing, and we're like, oh, how can we encourage researchers to review more? It's like, oh, maybe we can, hijack journal clubs. Basically, there are these meetings that happen almost every week in a lot of departments, not everywhere, in which we discussed already published journals. And I was personally frustrated about that process and decided to bring in preprints. And I was like, why can't we just write up a feedback that we've been here discussing for an hour and send it to the authors? Or even more, why can't actually we share this with everyone? and start actually using this as a training model for us to even learn how to peer review. So it was like a lot of there was a lot of involvement in the terms of like what the mission was. And because we were very open with what we were doing, we got a lot of support from huge communities like Mozilla, and Autorial let us have like a space on their website in which we could give DOIs to the reviews themselves. And so it's been like an incredible journey until it got more serious, because we actually got funding. And through the Mozilla Fellowship, I was able to dedicate more time in the past year to this project. And so Monica, that later joined, and Sam and I have been working on different platforms. And the idea is that we want to build a community that welcomes everybody to a space that is very scary. And so we started thinking about ways from a point of view of community building, from a point of view of features in a platform that we could think of, and messaging that could actually be inviting and create inviting for communities that are currently not the default engaged in scholarship and evaluation. And so we started asking questions like, how can we do that? And so we kind of evolved our mission to actually center what we want to do around using preprints and reviews of preprints as a way to bring more trained early career researchers and researchers from underrepresented communities in academia to the process of peer review, and kind of fill this gap that exists between preprint and what a journal would do. And so these are some of the questions that are also in the Etherpad that I'd like to discuss with you. And in general, I'm going to go very quickly here. We are about a week and a half from launch of a new platform, and so I'm very excited and also busy and scared that we have worked with amazing designers to help us kind of build a platform that would accommodate some of the needs. And this is just an MVP, but like in the needs of the community we want to serve. And so we're going to have a system in which we can hopefully more easily allow for revisions of preprints. And I'm not going to go into details of the platform. You can try it yourself in about a week and a half. Hopefully, nothing bad happens. And if you have questions, you can ask me. But in general, so we want to have this platform kind of a hub to grow this community of researchers to review. And we're also relevant again to this group. We're working towards a cohort-based peer review mentoring program. And all three of us, actually, Sam, Monica, and I, have gone through the cohort-based open leadership program that Mozilla offered for a few years now. And we all got so much out of that interaction, one-on-one interaction. And so I want to learn more. We want to learn more of how can we adapt those concepts. And actually, I want to learn more from the Carpentries communities about how can we adapt these concepts to the peer review training, and specifically how can we target our messaging, our curriculum, and everything that surrounds this idea and this project to specifically target people that would not feel like they're immediately the first, I guess, target of this messaging, which is a lot of early career researchers, to be honest, and a lot of researchers from underserved institutions. And I'm gonna try to cut it short. We have funding to run design sprints, and we have done one. This is specifically for a project we have funding from the Wellcome Trust with outbreak science. And so we're trying to build a specific platform and community around public health engagement. So to rapidly review preprints. This was one of the first sprints. It was done. We had a little bit of time to organize it, and I think everyone in the room was wonderful. And there were people from publishing platforms and from medical fields, and it was great. But what I want to do is that I actually want to make sure that this sprint that we're going to organize next, in which we can gather feedback and get more engagement, are actually tailored for the kind of mission that we actually want to do. And so I'd love to talk more about that and how we can do it more. Yeah, so this was 2 awesome days of creative thinking that was very helpful for what we came up with next. So I just want to conclude in saying that I believe you all share this, and here again I say science, but in general, like knowledge and should be a collaborative enterprise, and so I'm really positive in seeing so many people that are acting towards this goal. I want to thank obviously Sam and Monica for being an awesome team members, funders, Simply Secure, which is this awesome colorful logo down here, who has been helping us with the user interviews, and I've been learning so much coming from the bench. It's like a new world, and I'm incredibly lucky to have them to help us. So I'm going to stop my screen now, and there are again several questions that we can use, but I would love to hear from you first. And yeah, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Daniela. That was great. So first, yeah, let's see if there's any questions. You can type them actually either here in the chat or in the Etherpad. If there's any questions for Daniela to start.
I have a quick question to start, Daniela. So I was curious about the previous pre-reviews and how they're going to get migrated onto the new platform. I think I know that there's going to be like trainings and there's like, I imagine it would be beneficial to have kind of previous examples that have been published available for people who want to learn and get into it a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so absolutely. I sent about maybe 2 months ago. I don't know if I sent an email to all the people who are on PREreview, so the current PREreview platform hosted by Autoria, and told them that we were gonna move to a new platform. So I don't want that to disappear. But so what we did is that we had a consent form and asked them if they consent to us moving their content, keeping the same content, not changing it, to the new platform. However, we would need them to register as their ORCID ID. So for the new platform, the login will be through ORCID. And so this email and the form itself linked to ORCID and invited them to. And I think I received about 36, 38 email. I still receive it today. So there are people that are consenting. And so what we're going to do in the next week is to look through who said yes or no, and then migrate the content first. But yeah, so we won't lose, it will stay on Autoria. So if you have written the content on using Autoria, it will still show up in your profile, but you just will not show on the PREreview group. I actually have to see what's going to happen, because the domain is going to, all the DNS is going to be moved around, and I'm sure there's going to be issues with that. But
right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? And
yeah, I've got a question.
Great.
So in our group, there's a few of people in our collective that are nervous about preprints. Mainly so I guess two main things. One is some journals explicitly ask if your work has been, published anywhere online before submitting. So I'm starting to see that on more submission sites. So does that mean that preprints would preclude you from going further? And then the other part is academic theft. And frankly, women and people of color seem to experience this a little bit more. I mean, everyone has a horror story within academic circles of ideas getting shifted, and you find them in someone else's, or not just ideas, but actual outputs and analytical results. So I guess, especially if you are in a somewhat vulnerable position, is there a concern for, academic theft, I guess, with preprints?
Yeah. So now I'm super into the second question. Sorry, the first question. I remember. Yeah, the first the publishing. Okay, so the first question, it was one of the first concern. Actually, both of them among the first top 3 concerns of everybody around preprints. And a lot of journals have changed their policies to actually either encourage preprints or say that they're okay with that. There are ways to check those policies. So I'm going to say that, and then I'm going to continue with something a little bit different. There are ways to check the policy around preprints. And so I'm going to put it here in the chat. One tool that I have used actually last week when I posted my first preprint is called Sherpa Romeo. And then there is also transpose that was recently launched by ESABio. So if you search for a transpose ESABio, you can basically input the name of the journal that you wish to publish and check their policy. That said,
That's awesome.
even though I've been looking for this thing for a long time, I wanted to submit to a specific journal. So I uploaded my preprint, and I was like, oh, I have to choose a license. And now I want to know, is there going to be, because the license might be an issue for some journals. And so I was like, I want to know what's up for journal. And I found contrasting information about this specific journal. And I'm like, what the heck? Like even though I'm being deep into the weeds of these issues, I still can navigate the system with all these tools. So it's annoying and incredible. I think that there is a lot of space for improvement. Even though most of the journals, I still have to hear maybe some journals in the medical field. And I actually don't know a lot about maybe like, yeah, I think that for most journals, even like I was reading for psychology journals, the policy actually approves, or like that has nothing against preprints. However, I saw a thread on Twitter the other day that this person submitted to a psychology journal that she didn't want to mention what that was, with a preprint on PsyArchive. I think it's a psychology archive. And the editor went all about it, like how she was like trying to commit fraud. So he didn't read their own policy. The policy said specifically in his journal, he was the chief editor, that you can actually, I say he, probably might have been a she, but so they, I apologize, they didn't know their own policy, even though they were the chief editor of the journal. So there are still some confusion, but things are definitely changing. And I don't put that as one of the main concerns. The second concern that you raise is actually something that I'm really interested about, because and this is part of the whole things of like, what assumptions are we bringing? Like, I'm for sure bringing a ton of assumptions that are related to my own experience that come from, being trained first in Italy and then in the United States in a relatively prestigious institution. So the way how I think about this process is going to be biased for sure. And so the assumption that preprints are good for everybody needs to be questioned. And that is something that also I've been talking to researchers from institutions in Africa, specifically in Ghana. Yao Badiako, he's part of a team that is going to explore this actual process, this problem. And they were mentioning how some of the advantages institutions have against like a Harvard University is that they have they study malaria, for instance, in this specific event. And they were like, we have people with malaria here. We have advantages in actually analyzing all of this data faster, but we maybe have 2 people working in that. And then I publish a preprint, and there is a laboratory at Stanford with 35 postdocs, like they can go. And I think that's a real concern. The counter concern that I have with that is that when we share knowledge at conferences, it's very similar, like the risk of being scooped. I think it's very similar. And what I don't want is that fear is going to put behind. This is evolving. Preprints are happening right now. And so I don't want that because of this fear that only people that feel like vulnerable are going to be left behind. I think we need to find solutions to actually bring everybody into this evolving landscape. So I don't think it's preprints as a one fit all. We need to find better ways to actually prevent that from happening. I don't know what they are. Sorry, it was a long answer.
Thanks so much.
Love to hear you all's opinion on this and thoughts.
Thanks. I think there might be a question in the Etherpad. It says, have you spoken with existing publishers? And I don't know if that's related. Marinia.
Actually, that was the first thing we did. Sam and I was like still a student and Sam was a postdoc. We were like, let's set up calls with editorial boards. I don't know how we did it, but before we even started like thinking about a new platform, or like we were still thinking about like training, we have had several conversations with mostly open access. I have to say, we didn't seek other conversations. So PLOS, eLife, F1000, EMBO, PRJ, and the main goal of those discussions was how can we make this? Because we were thinking already, like if we really do this, how do we sustain, right? And so we would like even though this is recording, I'm gonna go on YouTube, even though my long-term goal, I don't actually think that journals are that critical. And here I'm gonna like, hope they don't listen to this thing. But I think that we really need, right now we can be without them. And so we need to, not every journals, but some journals, what we need to do is work in bringing more people to this like peer review process and like making it into a workflow that works for everybody. And then some other people are gonna work on like the problem of having high APCs for open access. That's not what we're doing. I think in my ideal world, we wouldn't need that because preprints are version, you have comments, people can self-assess. Perhaps this is, I'm very naive at thinking about that. So we'll see. I think we need to experiment. But yes, we have talked to them and most of them are very excited, especially about the training program and wanting to actually engage with that.
Thanks. There's a couple in the chat. One around the scooping, and doesn't the timestamp on the submitting prevent a bit the scooping? As in, see, this was published here first.
Right, except that it does, but it doesn't do it, it's not a policy, which I would like it to be a policy, right? I don't think that, I might be wrong here, I have to ask more experts, but I don't think there is a policy that explicitly says that, but that is the number one counter argument to scooping is that the DOI gives you that the time gives you a timestamp. And that is why preprints were started in the first place by Paul Ginsberg and Associates. I have to say, I still don't think that for vulnerable communities, that is a good reason, because if the professor at Harvard comes and say like, oh, I'm sorry if I keep saying also Harvard and Stanford, they're great institutions, but they're high up there. And they say like, oh, I push it first. I think an editor might say, oh, I'm sorry, sure, we'll post it. But if like I come there and like I come from nowhere and they were like, no, I'm sorry, right? So there's still a huge power dynamic imbalance that is not supported by policy.
Thanks. And Elizabeth has a question. Do you want to ask that question, Elizabeth?
Yeah, okay. I was just going to ask about what professional organizations you've worked with or hope to work with that are devoted to diversity and mentorship. For example, the National Society of Black Engineers or NCWIT.
I haven't, and that's why we're seeking. So this project for training is actually just at the very beginning. And what I want, like, this is like one of the things I want to actually engage with organizations and know way more about. And one of them is actually, frankly, the Carpentries, but like how specifically we can achieve that. And also the engagement. So for instance, like questions on how do we, because we cannot obviously at the beginning open this up to like hundreds of people. Like the Mozilla cohort started with 8 people. How do we choose these 8 people? Like do we put like, how do we choose our messaging? How do we make sure that we reach out to everybody? I think we will definitely need, so if you have some advice, I would love if you can put it in the Etherpad or contact me afterwards, because this is one of the reasons why I'm doing this call, because we want to do this, but we don't really know how. We're working on it. So the Triangle of Science this year, it's like a 4-day workshop that we're focusing on that. And I got incredible people from almost all over the world like to come and work on these discussions. But we need partnerships, and partnerships that are good not just for us. We don't want to exploit anyone. We want like a 2-way collaboration. Yeah.
Thanks. So I think that's the questions for now. So you had some questions for us to discuss. Which ones would be good to start with?
Yeah, I think that maybe we can start from this one about specifically like the training, like how, again, like I haven't had the opportunity to engage too much with the Carpentries aside for this topic calls. So, but I know that the Carpentries has done very well at reaching a global community of people. So A is like how do you engage people and make it their time worthwhile, not just, because I sometimes, even when I ask, like I'm thinking about like ambassador programs or people that can come and train others, right now we can barely, I just started like paying my salary, so we can't pay everyone. And so the idea is like, how do we make a volunteer-based program that is not gonna self-select for only people that can be volunteered. It's always like a really hard problem, and I feel incredibly guilty about asking people to do this. And I know, I've been able to do it because I could, right, for 2 years, and I had an incredible PI that was supportive. But how do we do that without, so that is like one question. I don't know if there is an answer. So in messaging and outreach, and how do we design the actual training program so that, because I also don't think there's going to be a peer review training program that's going to work for everybody, different workflows. So that's what we're trying to do at Triangle Science, like trying to learn what are different workflows and different rewards systems that could be put in place that actually are meaningful to that specific culture and scientific culture. And so, I don't know. I've asked maybe a million questions in 5 minutes, but.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, we could have some small group discussions. I'm thinking what a question could be related to that. So maybe, because we do have a bunch of volunteers here, the question could be, what do you value when volunteering for an organization or a project? Would that be a
thank you for summarizing.
Good question. Yeah. Okay.
I have this kind of brain, so this is how I think.
Okay. So let me phrase that question here. I think I'll write it in line 107. So, what do you value when volunteering for an organization or project? And I'm going to have a related one also, which is, what do you need to be able to effectively volunteer? Need from the organization.
Yeah, and I think this question also extends to community governance, which is something else that we are thinking about exploring more. We definitely don't want to be like the only ones leading this, right? So engaging more readership with understanding that we might be able to pay some of the staff, but not everybody. And so any advice on that? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to split us out potentially into breakout rooms. So I'm going to stop the recording for the breakout rooms. So thank you very much, Daniela.
Thank you.
And we'll head into breakout rooms. So everybody stay here. I'm just stopping the recording. Okay, stop.